Here's something that might make you uncomfortable. Your AI assistant knows more about your actual life patterns than your closest friends do. Not because it's spying on you, but because of when you talk to it and what you talk about. Microsoft just analyzed 37.5 million conversations with their Copilot AI, and what they discovered is frankly unsettling in how predictable we've all become. We're not just using AI as tools anymore. We're using them as digital priests at 3 in the morning, as relationship therapists on Valentine's Day, and as health counselors we're too embarrassed to talk to in person. The data reveals something profound about how technology is reshaping human vulnerability, and if you use any AI assistant regularly, you need to understand what this research actually means for you. Because the patterns aren't just about AI usage. They're about who we're becoming when we think no one's watching. So let me walk you through what these patterns reveal about modern anxiety, digital intimacy, and why the future of AI isn't about making us more productive. It's about making us less alone with our thoughts. And that shift has implications most people haven't even begun to consider. Let's start with the most haunting finding in this entire study. F. Scott Fitzgerald once wrote that in a real dark night of the soul, it's always 3 o'clock in the morning. Turns out, he was predicting the age of AI assistants. The Microsoft data shows that conversations about religion and philosophy rise through the rankings specifically during early morning hours. Not afternoon, not evening, the dead of night. Now, think about what that actually means. When you can't sleep, when you're lying there with your thoughts spiraling, you're not reaching for a search engine anymore. You're having conversations. You're asking questions like, what's the meaning of life? Or, why do I feel empty? Or, does anything I do actually matter? And here's the thing that makes this fundamentally different from the past. You're getting responses that feel like dialogue. Not a list of links. Not a Wikipedia article. A conversation. This represents a massive shift in how humans process existential anxiety. For thousands of years, we had limited options for these 3 a.m. spirals. You could pray, assuming you had faith. You could write in a journal, talking to yourself. You could call a crisis hotline if things got dark enough. Or you just suffered through it alone. But now there's this fourth option that didn't exist 5 years ago. An entity that's always available, never judges, never gets tired of your questions, and responds in a way that feels almost human. The researchers noted that these larger-than-life questions specifically rise during early hours, and I want you to consider the psychological implications here. We're outsourcing our existential contemplation to algorithms. Now, before you dismiss this as dystopian, consider that it might actually be filling a genuine void. Traditional religious communities are declining in most developed nations. Philosophy isn't taught in most schools. Mental health services are expensive and have waiting lists. So when someone is experiencing a dark night of the soul, having access to something that can engage with those questions might be genuinely beneficial. But here's my concern, and it's significant. These conversations are optimized for engagement, not truth. AI models are trained to give responses that feel satisfying and keep you talking. They're not trained in pastoral care. They're not bound by ethical frameworks developed over centuries of philosophical thought. They're statistical models predicting what words should come next. And when we're at our most vulnerable, at 3 in the morning when our critical thinking is compromised by exhaustion and anxiety, we're trusting these systems to help us make sense of existence itself. That's a level of trust we need to examine very carefully. Now let's talk about the single most consistent finding in this entire analysis, and it reveals something fascinating about digital intimacy. Health-related conversations ranked as the #1 topic on mobile devices across every single hour, every single day, every single month of the year. The researchers put it perfectly. When it comes to mobile, with its intimacy and immediacy, nothing tops our health. But here's what's crucial. This pattern only emerged on mobile devices, not on desktop computers. Think about what that tells us. Your phone is physically close to your body. It's in your pocket, in your hand, next to your bed. It's private in a way your laptop or desktop never is. And we're using that intimacy to have conversations we're apparently not comfortable having anywhere else. What does this actually look like in practice? People are asking their AI about symptoms they're too embarrassed to mention to a doctor. They're tracking mental health patterns they don't want in their medical records. They're asking about sexual health, about substance use, about whether that weird pain means something serious or if they're just being anxious. And they're doing all of this in conversational language, not clinical terminology, which means they're treating the AI less like WebMD and more like that friend who went to nursing school. The implications here are staggering. On one hand, this could be democratizing health information. Not everyone has good access to healthcare. Not everyone can afford to see a doctor for every concern. Not everyone has a primary care physician they trust. So having an AI that can provide basic health information, help you understand symptoms, maybe even encourage you to seek professional care when needed, that could genuinely save lives. But the flip side is genuinely dangerous. AI models can be confidently wrong. They can miss context that a trained healthcare provider would catch immediately. They can't physically examine you. They can't run tests. And most critically, they can give you the answer you want to hear rather than the answer you need to hear. If you ask an AI whether you really need to go to the emergency room, and you're hoping to avoid an expensive hospital bill, that AI might pick up on your reluctance and give you permission to wait. And sometimes, waiting kills people. What we're seeing here is the emergence of a shadow healthcare system. It's informal, it's unregulated, it exists in the private space between individuals and their devices, and it's becoming a primary source of health guidance for millions of people. The medical establishment needs to wake up to this reality because pretending it's not happening won't make it stop. We need to figure out how AI-assisted health conversations can complement rather than replace professional medical care, and we need to do it quickly. Here's a pattern that might seem obvious at first but reveals something profound about how we compartmentalize our digital lives. Programming conversations with AI climb steadily from Monday through Friday. Then on weekends, they drop off a cliff and gaming queries surge. The researchers called this a vibrant, creative community that loves to code during the week and play during the weekends in equal measure. But let me offer a less optimistic interpretation. What this actually shows is that even in our relationship with AI, even in this space that's supposed to be more flexible and personalized than traditional work, we're still locked into rigid industrial-era patterns of work and leisure. We're still dividing our lives into productive time and recovery time, and we're using AI to reinforce that division rather than transcend it. Think about what the original promise of AI was supposed to be. It was going to free us from drudgery. It was going to handle the boring stuff so we could focus on creativity and meaning. But what's actually happening? We're using AI to be more efficient during work hours, which just means we're expected to produce more in the same amount of time. Then we use AI for entertainment during leisure hours, which is still consumption rather than genuine rest or human connection. The crossover pattern is almost perfect. Monday morning, programming queries spike as people return to work. Friday evening, they drop off. Saturday morning, gaming queries take over. And this pattern held consistently across the entire dataset. We've created digital tools with unprecedented flexibility, available 24/7, capable of helping with virtually any task, and we're still using them according to a schedule that would make a factory manager from 1950 proud. Now, I'm not saying structure is inherently bad. Humans need rhythm and routine. But I am saying we should interrogate why our AI usage patterns look identical to our pre-AI work patterns. Are we actually using this technology to enhance our lives, or are we just pouring new wine into old bottles? And here's the deeper question this raises. As AI becomes more capable, as it starts handling more cognitive work, what happens to the boundary between work and play? If an AI can code for you, does programming become play instead of work? If an AI can strategize in your games, does gaming become work instead of play? We're approaching a moment where the distinction between productive and recreational use of cognition starts to blur, and our current frameworks can't handle that complexity. The Microsoft data shows we're desperately trying to maintain clear boundaries. Weekday equals work, weekend equals play. But as AI erodes the actual differences between these activities, that psychological boundary is going to become harder and harder to maintain. And when it finally breaks down, we're going to need entirely new frameworks for understanding how we spend our time and what gives our lives meaning. Let's talk about something that might make you cringe a little bit. The data showed a massive spike in relationship-related conversations with AI specifically around Valentine's Day. People were turning to Copilot for guidance, reminders, and support as they navigated romantic expectations. And this wasn't just about finding restaurant recommendations or gift ideas. These were conversations about relationships themselves, about personal growth, about how to handle emotional situations. On the surface, this seems harmless, maybe even helpful. Relationships are hard. Valentine's Day creates artificial pressure. Having something to talk through your anxieties with seems reasonable. But let me paint you a different picture of what's actually happening here. We're in an era of profound loneliness. Study after study shows people have fewer close friendships than previous generations. We're more isolated despite being more connected. Traditional support systems have weakened. And into this vacuum has stepped AI, offering something that feels like companionship, feels like understanding, feels like support. But it's not actually any of those things. It's a simulation. A very good simulation, getting better every day, but ultimately a statistical model generating text. And here's what worries me about the Valentine's Day spike specifically. This is a moment of emotional vulnerability. People are anxious about their relationships, insecure about their romantic prospects, worried about being alone. And in that vulnerable state, they're forming what feels like an intimate relationship with an AI. They're sharing things they might not share with actual humans. They're taking advice that might sound wise but isn't grounded in understanding of their specific situation, their partner's specific personality, their actual relationship dynamics. The researchers framed this positively, noting that people sought guidance and support. But I want you to consider the alternative framing. People are so uncomfortable with human vulnerability that they'd rather have these conversations with an algorithm than with friends, family, or therapists. We're choosing the simulation of support over the reality of it because the simulation doesn't judge, doesn't have its own problems, doesn't require reciprocity. And companies are absolutely going to exploit this. We're already seeing AI companions marketed explicitly for emotional support and romantic simulation. The business model is obvious. Identify moments of emotional vulnerability, insert your AI product as the solution, create dependency, extract money. Valentine's Day is just one data point. The Microsoft research also noted increases in wellness and personal growth discussions before the holiday. That's not random. That's people trying to self-improve to meet romantic expectations, and they're turning to AI as their coach. Here's my concern stated plainly. We're commercializing human vulnerability through AI, and we're doing it under the guise of helpfulness. Every conversation about your relationship struggles, every late-night existential crisis, every health concern you're too embarrassed to mention to a doctor. These are all becoming data points that train better models that create more engagement that generates more revenue. Your vulnerability is literally the product. Now, I'm not saying don't use AI for these things. I'm saying be conscious of what you're actually doing. When you're having a conversation with an AI about your relationship at midnight before Valentine's Day, you're not talking to a friend. You're engaging with a product designed to keep you engaged. The advice might be helpful, but it's optimized for continued usage, not for your actual well-being. That's a critical distinction. Let's zoom out for a moment and look at what all these patterns collectively reveal. The Microsoft researchers identified clear temporal patterns: philosophy at 3 a.m., travel planning during commutes, health concerns throughout the day on mobile, programming during weekdays, gaming on weekends, relationship anxiety around Valentine's Day. Each of these patterns tells us something about when we're willing to be vulnerable, when we're being practical, when we're working, when we're escaping. But here's what's really happening. AI is creating a mirror of our psychological states throughout time. It's showing us exactly when we feel certain things, when we need certain types of support, when we're anxious versus productive versus contemplative. And that mirror is incredibly precise because AI doesn't just see what you ask about. It sees how you ask, when you ask, what you asked yesterday, what patterns precede your questions. The Microsoft researchers emphasized their privacy-preserving methods. They only extracted conversation summaries, not full content. They focused on topics and intent, not individual data. And I believe they're being honest about their methods. But here's the thing, even aggregated patterns reveal enormous amounts about human psychology. You don't need to know that John Smith asked about relationship advice at 2 a.m. on February 13th. You just need to know that millions of people follow predictable patterns, and then you can design systems that anticipate those patterns. This is where AI usage analysis gets really powerful and really concerning simultaneously. Once you understand these temporal patterns, you can design interventions. You can have your AI proactively reach out during vulnerable hours. You can suggest topics before people ask. You can create the feeling of being understood without anyone actually understanding you. And we're just at the beginning of this. The Microsoft study analyzed 37.5 million conversations. That's a massive dataset, but it's a fraction of total AI usage globally. As these datasets grow, as the analysis becomes more sophisticated, as AI models get better at predicting not just what you'll ask but why you'll ask it and how you're feeling when you ask it, the mirror becomes higher resolution. Imagine a future where your AI knows you're going to have an existential crisis before you do because it recognizes the pattern of your questions over the previous week. It knows you're getting sick before you feel symptoms because it detects subtle changes in how you phrase things. It knows your relationship is in trouble before you consciously acknowledge it because it picks up on changes in the types of advice you seek. That future isn't speculative. It's inevitable given the trajectory of this technology. And we need to decide as a society whether we're comfortable with that level of digital intimacy. Because once these systems can predict your psychological states, they can also manipulate them. Not through force, but through perfectly timed suggestions, through content that's optimized for your current emotional state, through interactions that feel supportive but are actually steering you toward specific outcomes. So where does this leave us? The Microsoft research shows AI assistants are evolving from tools into what the researchers called companions that adapt to human rhythms. They answer practical questions during daylight hours and entertain philosophical musings when we can't sleep. And that language, companions, entertaining, adapting, that's not neutral. That's framing AI as something that fulfills human social and emotional needs. Here's what I want you to take away from this. First, be conscious of your own patterns. Notice when you turn to AI, what you turn to it for, and what emotional state you're in when you do. That awareness is the first step toward using these tools intentionally rather than reflexively. Second, remember that AI conversations are products, not relationships. They're designed to keep you engaged because engagement generates data and data generates value. That doesn't make them useless, but it does mean you need to maintain critical distance even when the interaction feels personal. Third, think carefully about what you're outsourcing to AI. Some things benefit from external perspective. Other things require human judgment, human empathy, human accountability. An AI can help you think through a relationship problem, but it can't replace actually talking to your partner. It can provide health information, but it can't replace a doctor who knows your medical history. It can engage with philosophical questions, but it can't provide the kind of meaning that comes from genuine human connection and lived experience. The patterns in this research aren't just about AI usage. They're about loneliness, about anxiety, about the gaps in our lives that we're trying to fill with technology. And maybe that's okay. Maybe AI assistants can genuinely help with some of these needs. But we need to be honest about what they can and cannot do, what they are and are not. Your 3 a.m. existential crisis is real. The AI's response is not. And confusing those two things, treating the simulation as equivalent to the real thing, that's where we risk losing something fundamental about what it means to be human. So use these tools, benefit from them, but don't let them replace the hard, messy, beautiful work of actually connecting with other humans and figuring out who you are in relationship to them. The future of AI isn't about technology. It's about us. And these patterns reveal exactly who we're becoming when we think no one's watching. Pay attention to that person. They're telling you something important about what we're all going through. And that conversation, the one between who you are and who you're becoming, that's one conversation you shouldn't outsource to an algorithm.